All right, it's time for art journaling. I can't believe it's October already. I am starting here with some Canson watercolor paper and two heavy body acrylics, one by Blick. It's a light blue, I think is the name of that, and then one by Amsterdam. And I will have to get the name of the Amsterdam one. It looks very dark blue in the bottle, but once you start kind of playing around with it, it's got this very cool dark teal aspect to it. And I sprayed my page with water first, and then I applied my acrylics while everything was still wet. I also went back in with a tiny bit of gesso to act as kind of white. And so we're playing with wet on wet on wet acrylic. So the two acrylics are wet, the gesso's wet, and then I also sprayed the page beforehand. And I was just kind of playing in the background, getting this kind of stripy paintbrush stroke effect, and I wasn't exactly sure where I was going to take it. I was just playing around and seeing what would happen. Now I'm using a palette knife and some gesso to kind of mask some of those wider areas. I wanted them to be there, but after kind of looking at it, I decided that my page needed a bit of texture. So I'm just using some gesso and my palette knife to scrape some thin layers over that white and kind of almost blend it in, even though that's not why I'm doing it. Does that make sense? So I'm just doing it for texture, and it just so happens that there were some already kind of fun white areas there. And now I'm doing some mark making with just my paintbrush and some gesso, and um I'm just dabbing on kind of randomly in a little area there. Excuse me. And I've kind of been practicing making things random, and I'm not sure why, but I've kind of always ended up with things that are very specific and linear. Now I've got a baby wipe out, and essentially I was trying to, if you've watched any of my videos before, I was just trying to heat the edge of the gesso and then get rid of the paint that was in the middle. But because gesso is thin and it's made of other things that are not specifically acrylic, when it didn't react exactly the same. So what I ended up getting was sort of this washed out kind of effect, almost like old boards or something. It's very cool. And so it was fun and I went with it. Why not, right? It was just a new technique, a new result, and I'll probably be using it a lot. Great way to make things look aged. And then I have this is a just a regular graphite pencil for architecture, and it comes in a big set. So this is actually a 4H, and that means hard, and it's number 4 on the scale. So it's a fairly hard pencil, which means that it's not going to transfer much graphite. And I'm just making some marks with it. So if you have any pencil sets like that, that's what those numbers mean. B means soft. HB is right in the middle, and that's kind of where a number 2 pencil usually is. So, and here we are now. I'm getting out, I have part of a collection of some little like super vintage encyclopedias, and I didn't care which page I picked. I just ripped one out. And then I also had a note card there. I don't know if you saw that. I've got my Stabilo out, and I picked this up from Ivy Newport. This is really cool. Blackout poetry. We're actually going to use white instead of black, but basically you kind of just take a random text, like a big block of text, and you create your own poetry in it. And so it's very cool and unique, and I'm really enjoying doing it. I've done a tag duo with it on an artist live project last week or a couple weeks ago. And so my favorite thing about it is that you never really know what you're going to get. And so my poem that I got this time says fragment characters resting in the branches. And that was really cool to me. And I didn't sit down and try to get that, that's just what I found. And I liked the words and how they seemed to flow. And so those are the circles. Those are the words that I circled, and I used my Stabilo, and then I am just using some gesso and kind of whiting out the words that are directly around my new poem. And then I'm going to whitewash some other areas. This part right here kind of sucks a little bit. I got way too close to the Stabilo, like over it and through the word. And so that one last word, branches, is now very dark, because even though Stabilo is washable, it's a Marxall pencil and it will just like wipe right off plastic and metal and things like that. Well, this is not plastic and metal. It's a piece of vintage paper. So once I added that water to that water soluble pencil, it kind of soaked up all of the stuff there. But we'll just go with it. It's imagery. What can you do? So I am whiting out the words right around my new poem, fairly opaque, and then I'm kind of whitewashing the rest of it because I don't want it to be lost that I found these words on some vintage text. And just making sure everything's dry. There's that note card that I mentioned I had. I have a safety pin. Oh, and yeah, then I have two May Arts ribbons. This one I was trying to work it in because it's a teal color and it was looking really pretty next to those blues, but I didn't like how it ended up going. So I will eventually just throw that out after I kind of play around a little bit here. But the bottom one, and you'll see right there, it's a cool vintage ruler type fabric, and it's just an entire spool of ribbon that I have. It's very cool. It'll be making it into quite a few projects, I'm sure. And you can make your ribbons and things look distressed too. You can use some regular distress tools or things like that, and you can tease stain them or just even distress ink them, or sometimes it's just as simple as to kind of like roll it up in a ball in your fingers. Oh, and here, three of the four sides of my little dictionary page were straight, and it was only tattered on that one edge where I had pulled it out. So I did decide to rip the bottom edge too, and that really helped some things. And I'm going to safety pin my little pieces together. So the bottom layer is a note card. The second layer is my new blackout poetry or whiteout poetry in this case, and then a section of that ribbon. And I thought that was very cool. Kind of loving the collage aspect, the layering aspect there. I did a little bit more mark making with my hard pencil, and then now I've got the gesso back out. I decided to bring in some more white and kind of just build up my background a little bit, playing some with those kind of marks that I was making earlier with the paintbrush, just adding more layers and more depth. And I do want to make sure that everything's dry before I move on. So as long as we're using acrylic-based products, then we'll be fine and everything can be dried and permanent. And then here, I'm going to do some more mark making with my Stabilo, but this time I'm just kind of putting funny little dots, and it doesn't have to be anything specific. Like you could do X's or you could do blocks or anything you want, but now I'm activating those with water, and they kind of just add a bit of tone, some darkness happening in those areas. And I mentioned in my last video, I think, that I am trying to work more with colors specifically for my art journaling group because I do like neutrals a lot. And as long as I'm using color, it's pushing me out of my boundaries too. So that's one of the reasons I started with this whole entire page covered in this blue color. Now I'm not going to leave that ribbon there. I just needed to mark. Please feel free to check out. I just did a flip through of my art journal, and what I do with my pages is I fold them in half and then I glue the wrong sides together and then I create a cover. And so you can see that art journal, but the reason I laid that ribbon down was because I needed to mark where I wanted my new little collage to go so that once it was folded in half, it was perfectly centered on the left page. And now I'm using some Yoo-Hoo and I'm going to glue that down, and I just marked it with a pencil where I had wanted that to go. And I can Yoo-Hoo that down. And now I've got some masking tape, and I wanted to mimic the kind of vintagey tan tone that was coming from the paper. So I'm going to use some masking tape as an embellishment, and as it's just another like layer that's happening, that's unfolding in our story. And it has kind of a vintage tone to it already, and it's perfect like it is. So I've just made some kind of tattered edges and ripped some areas and made them different widths and different lengths. And I'm using those to both secure down my fancy new collage and as elements around the edge of the page. And this is a Poppy Pod Skelly from Unwow Studio. It's a chipboard piece and I love it so much, and I'm just going to use it completely in the raw today. I'm not going to alter it in any way. I'm doing a bit more mark making with my pencil. I am really, really enjoying kind of using different utensils. Like I like using a fine liner. I like using a Stabilo and the woody crayons and the Lyra graphite, water soluble graphite, and two, I just like bringing in a pencil and scribbling around with that. It's really fun. I really like the grunginess that it adds to my work. I used some matte medium to glue the chipboard down. It needs something that's a bit sturdy. I have found that as time goes by, any of my pages where I've glued chipboard down with something else, like a Yoo-hoo, they're not really holding that well. And I did a little final taping there over my Poppy Pod Skelly. And I'm going to give it a bit of a shadow with the Stabilo. And I'll just go around the, let's see, bottom right kind of area and then activate that with water, and it just makes that Poppy Pod Skelly chipboard piece. It just pops it just a little bit more with that. And then I'm going to do some handwriting around the edge of my new little collage. Oh, I am securing the page down. So I did like the element where the vintage text kind of curled up away from the page, but then I decided that it was a bit too 3D and I didn't want it to get crunched. I definitely want to make sure my poem stays there. So I glued down some more of those edges, and now I'm just going to do a bit of journaling around the page that relates to my poem. So personal for me, and I hope you found some inspiration today. Thank you so much for being here. Feel free to subscribe, and then you'll see all of the new videos that pop up. I'm doing art journaling once a week. I have some Donna Downey videos, other videos that aren't art journaling based, but maybe mixed media based, and like art journal walkthroughs, things like that. As well as our mixed media moods, which is a really great collaboration that I have going on with Jen Ingle, and we're starting to bring in some guest designers. So stick around for that. Thanks so much again for joining me.